In 1397, Giovanni di Medici de' Medici had nothing. No inheritance, no title, no safety net. 40 years later, his family controlled the financial infrastructure of Europe. Not through luck, not through inheritance, through 7 specific mindset shifts that most people will never make. You've been told that building wealth requires better tactics, smarter investments, a tighter budget, more discipline. That's the lie that keeps you trading hours for someone else's number. The real gap isn't what you do, it's how you think. And that gap is wider than you realize. The Medici didn't outwork their competitors, they outthought them. While merchants counted coins, the Medici designed the system that made the coins. While others saw transactions, they saw infrastructure. While the world chased immediate profit, they built generational leverage. This video documents 7 exact shifts in thinking, all verified through 3 centuries of Medici financial records that turn employees into architects. Most people operate from employee mindset without knowing it. They think in hours, in tasks, in paychecks. They believe the path to wealth is working harder at the job, getting the promotion, maxing the 401k, cutting the coffee. That's not wealth building. That's wage optimization. And wage optimization has a ceiling you hit faster than you think. The Medici saw something different from day one. They didn't see customers. They saw systems. They didn't see transactions. They saw infrastructure. When a merchant in Florence wanted to move money to London in 1400, everyone else saw a single transaction. The Medici saw a recurring system that could be owned. That shift, from transaction to system, is the first gap. And it's the gap most never cross. Because crossing it requires letting go of the one thing you've been taught gives you security. Trading time for money. You can't build millions by being better at your job. You build millions by making your job irrelevant. Here's what separates thinking from doing. Most people know they should invest. They know they should save. They know they should build something, but they don't. Not because they lack information, because they lack the shift. Knowledge without mindset shift is just trivia. You can read every book on wealth and stay broke. Because reading about systems and building systems require different operating systems in your head. The Medici made 7 shifts, not 7 strategies. Shifts. A strategy is what you do. A shift is who you become. And who you become determines what you're capable of building. These aren't motivational. They're structural, documented, verified through centuries of financial records. The family that went from nothing to controlling the Pope made these exact shifts. And the ones who stayed poor, the ones who had the same opportunities, the same information, the same starting point, didn't. Shift 1. From hours to systems. The employee trades hours. The architect builds systems that run without them. In 1397, Giovanni di Medici didn't take deposits and make loans himself. He designed a system where others took deposits and made loans under his structure. He wasn't the hardest working banker in Florence. He was the one who made his work unnecessary. By 1420, the Medici Bank had branches across Europe, operating while Giovanni slept. The shift isn't working less. It's building something that works when you don't. Most people hear that and think passive income. That's not it. Passive income is the result. The shift is deeper. It's seeing your role not as doer, but as designer. Not as worker, but as architect. When someone asks what you do, and your answer is a task, I trade, I sell, I consult, you haven't made the shift. When your answer is a system, I built a network that does X, you have. Here's the test. If you stopped working tomorrow, would money still come in 6 months from now? If the answer is no, you're still trading hours. You haven't built a system. You've built a better job. The Medici Bank didn't just survive Giovanni's death in 1429. It expanded. Because Giovanni built a structure that operated on rules, not on him. Branch managers had authority. Lending criteria were documented. Profit sharing was systematized. The bank was a machine. And machines don't need their inventor to keep running. That's the shift. You're not trying to be the best at the task. You're trying to make the task run without you. Most people resist this because it feels like losing control. It's the opposite. Employees are controlled by their hours. Architects control the system. The Medici controlled European finance for 3 centuries, not because they worked every hour of those 3 centuries, because they built something that didn't need them to. Shift 2. From ownership to access. Poor people buy things. Rich people buy access to things. The Medici didn't own the ships that moved their goods. They didn't own the buildings that housed their branches. They didn't own the armies that protected their interests. They had access to all of it. Ownership ties up capital. Access deploys it. In 1435, when Cosimo de' Medici needed to move a fortune in gold from Florence to Basel for the church council, he didn't buy a fleet and hire guards. He used the network. Other people's ships, other people's security, other people's risk. He paid for access, not ownership. The gold arrived, the Medici profit was recorded, and Cosimo never touched the wheel. This is the shift most people miss, because it feels counterintuitive. We're taught that wealth is owning things. The car, the house, the stuff. That's not wealth. That's expense disguised as assets. The Medici owned the bank. They had access to everything else. Ships, property, influence, military force, political power. They didn't tie up capital owning what they could access. That freed up capital to deploy where it multiplied. This is how the family went from regional bankers to kingmakers. They had access to the Pope. They didn't need to be the Pope. They had access to armies. They didn't need to own the armies. They had access to trade routes. They didn't need to own the roads. Access gives you leverage without the liability. Ownership gives you control with the cost. Most people optimize for ownership because it feels like security. The house you own, the car you own, the thing with your name on it. But every dollar locked in ownership is a dollar not deployed in leverage. The Medici deployed. That's the shift. Stop buying things. Start buying access to the things that multiply your capability. Pause. Think of one thing you own right now. One physical thing. Car, house, equipment. Now ask yourself, does owning this multiply my capability, or does it lock up my capital? If it's not producing more than it costs to own, you're not building wealth. You're storing value, and stored value doesn't compound. The Medici never confused the two. They stored almost nothing. They deployed almost everything. That's not recklessness, it's precision. Every florin that wasn't actively multiplying was a florin wasting potential. Most people do the opposite. They lock up everything in ownership and deploy almost nothing in leverage. Then they wonder why the numbers don't move. The numbers don't move because the capital doesn't move. And the capital doesn't move because the mindset hasn't shifted. From ownership to access. Make the shift. Shift 3. From expenses to investments. Most people see 2 categories: income and expenses. Money comes in, money goes out. That's the framework. And that framework guarantees you stay broke. Because in that model, everything you spend is gone. The Medici saw 3 categories: income, expenses, and investments. An expense is money out that doesn't come back. An investment is money out that returns more. Same money leaving, completely different outcome. In 1439, Cosimo de' Medici spent 10,000 florins, a fortune, hosting the Council of Florence. Bishops, cardinals, scholars from across Europe. Most people would call that an expense. Cosimo called it an investment, and he was right. The relationships built during that council gave the Medici access to church finances for the next 50 years. The 10,000 florins returned 100 times over. That's the shift. Every time money leaves your hand, you choose which category it goes into. Here's the brutal part. Most of what you call expenses could be investments if you changed how you used them. The coffee isn't the problem. Buying the coffee and getting nothing but caffeine is the problem. Buying the coffee and having the meeting that opens the door is an investment. Same $5, different outcome. The Medici never spent money just to spend it. Every florin had a job. Build a relationship, open a door, create access, generate leverage. If the money went out and nothing came back, it didn't go out. This doesn't mean being cheap. It means being intentional. The Medici threw feasts that cost fortunes. But every guest at that feast was a future alliance. Every conversation was a future opportunity. The feast wasn't consumption. It was deployment. That's the shift. Stop asking, "Can I afford this?" Start asking, "Will this return more than it costs?" If yes, it's an investment. If no, it's an expense. Choose accordingly. Shift 4. From saving to deploying. Saving is not a wealth strategy, it's a survival strategy. And if you're still optimizing for survival, you haven't made the leap to building. The Medici didn't save their way to power. They deployed their way to power. In 1464, when Piero de' Medici inherited the bank, the family vault held almost nothing. Not because they were broke, because they weren't hoarders. Every florin that could be deployed was deployed, lent, invested, leveraged. The vault was a temporary stop, not a destination. Most people do the opposite. They optimize the savings account. They celebrate the emergency fund. They feel secure when the number gets bigger. That's not security. That's dormant capital. And dormant capital is dead capital. It doesn't grow. It doesn't multiply. It sits. The Medici understood something most people never learn. Money at rest is money wasting. Every day a florin sat idle was a day of lost potential. Here's the shift. Savings are for people who need a buffer against disaster. Deployment is for people building empires. Which one are you? If disaster is still your primary financial fear, you're not ready to build wealth. You're still in survival mode. And that's fine. Survival mode is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You have to graduate. The graduation happens when you start seeing idle money as lost opportunity, when having 10,000 in the bank feels worse than having 10,000 working. That's the shift. The Medici graduated early. By the time Cosimo took control in 1434, the family didn't think in terms of what they had saved. They thought in terms of what they had deployed, and what they had deployed controlled half the wealth of Europe. Not because they saved more, because they deployed better. Stop celebrating the savings account balance. Start measuring what you have in motion. Shift 5. From avoiding risk to leveraging risk. Risk is not the enemy. Unmanaged risk is the enemy. The Medici didn't avoid risk. They engineered it. In 1466, the Medici Bank faced a crisis. Their largest debtor, Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, defaulted on a massive loan. Most banks would have collapsed. The Medici didn't. Not because they avoided the risk, because they had distributed it. The Burgundy loan was split across 6 branches. Each branch absorbed a fraction. No single point of failure. The bank survived. The lesson isn't avoid risk, it's structure risk, so survival is guaranteed, even when things go wrong. Poor people avoid risk entirely and guarantee small outcomes. Rich people take massive risks without structure and often lose everything. The Medici took massive risks with structure. That's the difference. They didn't ask, "Is this risky?" They asked, "How do we take this risk and survive the worst case?" Most people think risk management means risk avoidance. It doesn't. It means building systems that let you take big risks without catastrophic consequences. The Medici took risks that would have destroyed any other bank. They lent to kings, to popes, to governments, all high-risk, high-reward borrowers. And they survived every default because they never put all the weight on one branch. They structured. That's the shift. From avoiding risk to structuring risk. If you're avoiding every opportunity because it might not work, you've already lost. Because the safe path guarantees mediocrity. But if you're taking risks without structure, you're gambling. And gambling always catches up. The Medici never gambled. They calculated. They distributed. They survived. And survival at scale is what builds dynasties. Stop avoiding risk. Start structuring it. That's how you take the opportunities most people are too afraid to touch. Shift 6. From consuming status to building leverage. Most people spend money to look rich. The Medici spent money to become powerful. There's a difference. Looking rich is consumption. Being powerful is leverage. In 1450, the Medici commissioned Donatello to create the Bronze David, the first freestanding nude sculpture since ancient Rome. It cost a fortune. Most people would call that vanity. A rich family showing off. But the David wasn't about showing off. It was about signaling. The sculpture sent a message to every artist, every scholar, every thinker in Europe. The Medici are the patrons who fund greatness. Within a decade, the greatest minds of the Renaissance were orbiting Florence. Not Rome, not Venice, Florence. Because the Medici had bought access to genius. The David wasn't consumption. It was an investment in cultural leverage that made Florence the intellectual capital of Europe for a century. Here's the test. When you spend money on something visible, ask yourself, am I buying status or building leverage? Status is what people see. Leverage is what people need from you. The expensive car is status. It signals wealth, but it doesn't create access. It doesn't open doors. It doesn't make you necessary. The Medici understood this at a cellular level. When Lorenzo de' Medici funded Michelangelo's education, he wasn't buying a statue. He was buying access to the mind that would define an era. That access made Lorenzo the man every artist wanted to meet. Every scholar wanted to impress. Every rival had to respect. That's leverage. Most people spend their money to impress strangers. The Medici spent their money to make strangers need them. One creates envy. The other creates power. The shift is simple. Stop buying what looks good. Start buying what makes you necessary. Shift 7. From seeing yourself as an employee to seeing yourself as an architect. This is the final shift, and it's the one that contains all the others. The employee works in the system. The architect designs the system. The employee optimizes their role. The architect makes roles irrelevant. The employee trades time for money. The architect builds structures that generate money without time. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici started as a banker's apprentice. He worked in someone else's system. He learned the rules. He mastered the tasks. Then he stopped. He didn't climb the ladder. He built a different building. By 1397, he wasn't working in a bank. He owned the bank. And the bank was just the beginning. The shift from employee to architect is not about starting a business. It's about changing how you see your role in the world. Employees see themselves as pieces in someone else's machine. Architects see themselves as builders of machines. The employee mindset asks, how do I get better at this task? The architect mindset asks, how do I make this task unnecessary? The employee mindset optimizes within constraints. The architect mindset removes constraints. The employee mindset seeks job security. The architect mindset builds ownership. These aren't small differences. They're different operating systems. And you can't run architect software on employee hardware. The shift requires rewiring. It requires seeing yourself not as someone who contributes to a system, but as someone who builds systems. Most people never make this shift because it feels arrogant. Who am I to design systems? Who am I to build something that runs without me? But that's employee thinking. That's the voice that keeps you small. The Medici didn't ask permission to become architects. They just started building. And the world rearranged itself around what they built. Here's what this looks like in practice. An employee in 2025 works in digital marketing. They optimize ad campaigns. They improve conversion rates. They get better at the tasks. An architect in 2025 builds a system that runs ad campaigns. They hire the optimizer. They document the process. They turn their expertise into a machine that operates without them. Same starting point, completely different outcome. The employee makes more money per hour. The architect makes money without hours. That's the shift. And it's available to everyone. You don't need permission. You don't need credentials. You need to stop seeing yourself as a worker and start seeing yourself as a builder. The Medici were builders, not of banks, of systems, not of wealth, of infrastructure. The wealth was just the output. The identity was architect. Make that your identity. The rest follows. Let's be clear about what these shifts are not. They're not tactics. They're not strategies. They're not things you do. They're ways you think. And the difference matters, because tactics without mindset shifts fail. You can copy every Medici strategy and stay broke if you're still thinking like an employee. The strategies only work when the operating system changes. Most people collect tactics, better budgeting, smarter investing, side hustles, passive income streams, all useful, none sufficient, because the person executing those tactics is still thinking in hours, still optimizing within someone else's system, still seeing themselves as a piece, not an architect. The Medici didn't win because they had better tactics. They won because they thought differently. And that different thinking made tactics that would fail for others succeed for them. The shift comes first. The tactics come second. Never the other way around. Think about someone you know who makes good money but never builds wealth. They earn, they spend, the number resets, month after month, year after year. They're not stupid, they're not lazy, they just haven't made the shifts. They're still trading hours for dollars, still seeing expenses as just expenses, still avoiding risk instead of structuring it, still optimizing their job instead of building their system. They have employee mindset with a bigger paycheck, and a bigger paycheck without mindset shift just means bigger expenses. The Medici proved this in reverse. They started with nothing, no inheritance, no connections, no capital. But they had the shifts, and the shifts turned nothing into everything, because the shifts change what you see, and what you see determines what you build. Most people never build because they never see what's possible. The shifts give you the vision gives you the path gives you the wealth. Now the hard truth. Most people watching this will not make these shifts. They'll recognize themselves in the employee mindset. They'll nod along, they'll agree with the logic, and then they'll go back to optimizing their job. Because the shifts are uncomfortable. They require letting go of what feels safe. Trading hours for money feels safe. Owning things feels safe. Saving feels safe. Avoiding risk feels safe. These shifts ask you to let go of safe. Not recklessly, strategically, but still, let go. And most people won't. They'll watch this video, they'll understand intellectually, and they'll change nothing. Because understanding is not the same as shifting. Shifting requires action. It requires risk. It requires becoming someone different than who you are right now. The Medici made these shifts in a world far more dangerous than yours. No safety net, no bankruptcy protection, no second chances. You have every advantage they didn't. The question is, Will you use it? Here's a test, a real one, right now. Pause for 10 seconds and answer this question honestly. Which of these 7 shifts have you actually made? Not which ones make sense, not which ones you plan to make. Which ones have you actually, in your real life, already shifted? If the answer is 0, you're still fully in employee mindset. If it's 1 or 2, you're in transition. If it's 4 or more, you're already thinking like an architect. You just need to build bigger. Most people won't pause. Most people will keep watching. That's fine. But the ones who pause, the ones who actually take 10 seconds to assess where they are, those are the ones who have a chance. Because assessment requires honesty, and honesty is the first requirement of change. The Medici were brutally honest about where they were. No romanticizing, no excuses, just, we are here, we want to be there. What has to shift? I'll tell you where I was when I first learned this. I thought I was building wealth. I had the tactics. I was saving, investing, hustling. The numbers were moving, slowly, and I couldn't figure out why slowly. Then I read the Medici financial records, not a biography, the actual ledgers, the loan documentation, the branch operational guidelines. And I saw it. They weren't doing more. They were thinking different. Every strategy I thought was about tactics was actually about mindset, the shift from hours to systems, from ownership to access, from expenses to investments. I had been collecting tactics. They had been operating from a different mental model. That's when I stopped trying to be better at the tactics and started making the shifts. The tactics got easier because I wasn't fighting my own operating system anymore. That's the confession. I had to make these shifts too. They weren't natural. They were learned. And if I could learn them, you can learn them. Let's make this concrete. If you're going to make one shift this week, make shift 1, from hours to systems. Here's how. Take something you do repeatedly, a task, a service, a skill, something people pay you for or would pay you for. Now document it. Write down every step, every decision point, every tool. Make it so clear that someone else could do it without you. That's not delegation, that's system design. You're not trying to hand off the task yet. You're trying to see the task as a system that could run without you. Most people skip this step because it feels like busy work. It's not. It's the shift. The moment you document the system, you stop being the system. You become the architect of the system. And that changes everything. The Medici didn't start with 7 branches across Europe. They started with one documented process in Florence. Then they copied it. Then they scaled it. You can do the same thing. Start with one system. Here's what happens when you make the shifts. The opportunities you couldn't see before become visible. The risks you avoided become manageable. The capital you locked up becomes deployable. The time you traded becomes leveraged. You don't become a different person. You become a more capable version of the same person. Because the shifts don't change your personality. They change your operating system. And a better operating system runs the same software faster. The Medici weren't superhuman. They weren't geniuses. They were bankers who thought like architects instead of employees. That shift, that single reframe, built a dynasty that lasted 3 centuries. You're not trying to build a 3-century dynasty. You're trying to build a life where money isn't the limiting factor, where time isn't the constraint, where your capability isn't capped by your hours. These 7 shifts get you there. Not immediately, not magically, but systematically, the way the Medici did it, through mindset first, strategy second, execution third. The objection you're thinking right now, this worked for the Medici because they lived in Renaissance Florence. Different time, different rules, different opportunities. That's the objection that keeps you stuck. Because yes, different time, different rules, different opportunities. But the same mindset shifts. The shift from hours to systems works in any era. The shift from ownership to access works in any economy. The shift from employee to architect works in any century. The Medici had fewer tools than you. No internet, no instant communication, no global markets. They built empires with letters that took weeks to arrive, with accounting done by hand, with risk that could end in execution. You have technology they couldn't imagine, access they couldn't dream of, safety they never had. If the shifts worked for them with nothing, they'll work for you with everything. The question isn't whether the shifts work. The question is whether you'll make them. Let's talk about what wealth actually is, because most people have the wrong definition. They think wealth is a number, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million. That's not wealth. That's a scorecard. Wealth is capability. It's the ability to do what you want without asking permission. The ability to take 6 months off without financial consequence. The ability to say no to opportunities that don't serve you. The ability to help people you care about without calculating cost. That's wealth. And that wealth comes from systems, not savings. From leverage, not labor. From thinking like an architect, not working like an employee. The Medici weren't trying to reach a number. They were trying to build capability. The capability to fund artists, to influence popes, to control trade, to shape politics. The number was just the fuel. The capability was the wealth. Make that your target. Not the number, the capability. Here's the final truth. These shifts are not optional if you want to build real wealth. They're required. You can make money without them. You can have a good income. You can be comfortable. But you can't build the kind of wealth that changes your family's trajectory without changing how you think. The Medici went from nothing to shaping European history for 300 years. Not through inheritance, not through luck, through systematic mindset shifts that changed what they could see and what they could build. You're not trying to shape European history, but you are trying to change your trajectory. And the same shifts that worked for them will work for you. From hours to systems, from ownership to access, from expenses to investments, from saving to deploying, from avoiding risk to structuring risk, from consuming status to building leverage, from employee to architect. 7 shifts. Make them in order. Make them completely. Make them permanent. That's how wealth gets built. Think about where you are right now, financially, professionally, personally. Now think about where you want to be, not in fantasy, in reality. What does that gap look like? For most people, that gap is filled with tactics they think they need to learn. Better investing, more hustle, smarter budgeting. But the tactics aren't the gap. The mindset is the gap. The Medici closed the gap from regional bankers to European kingmakers in 2 generations, not because they found better tactics, because they made the shifts that made the tactics work. You can spend the next decade collecting tactics and stay exactly where you are. Or you can spend the next month making the shifts and watch the tactics suddenly work. The choice is simple. The execution is hard, but the execution is possible. Because these aren't mystical transformations. They're documented changes in thinking that real people made in real time with real results. You can make them too. One more thing, the shifts compound. Each one makes the next one easier. When you shift from hours to systems, the shift from expenses to investments becomes natural, because you're thinking in systems, not transactions. When you shift from ownership to access, the shift from saving to deploying becomes obvious, because you're not locking up capital in dead assets. When you shift from employee to architect, all the other shifts align, because architect thinking contains all of them. The Medici didn't make 7 separate shifts. They made one fundamental shift, from participant to designer, and the other 6 followed. That's the secret. You're not trying to make 7 different changes. You're trying to make one deep change that cascades through everything. The shift from seeing yourself as a piece in someone else's machine to seeing yourself as a builder of machines. Make that shift. The rest follows. That's how the Medici did it. That's how you do it too. This is where most videos end, with the information, with the inspiration, with the hope that you'll figure out the next step. This video doesn't end there, because information without implementation is entertainment. And you didn't watch this to be entertained. You watched this because something in you knows you're capable of more than you're currently building. That knowing is correct. You are capable of more. But capability without implementation stays theoretical. The Medici didn't theorize. They implemented. They made the shifts. They built the systems. They deployed the capital. They structured the risk. They became architects. And the world rearranged itself around what they built. You can do the same thing. Not at the same scale, not in the same era, but with the same fundamental approach. Shift the thinking. Build the systems. Deploy the capital. Structure the risk. Become the architect. The world rearranges around what you build too. Smaller scale. Same principle. So here's what happens next. You have 2 paths. Path 1, you close this video. You go back to what you were doing. You think about the shifts. You agree with them intellectually, and you change nothing. That's the path most people take. It's comfortable. It's safe. It requires nothing. Path 2, you pick one shift. You implement it this week. You document one system. You deploy $1 you were saving. You structure one risk you were avoiding. You build one piece of leverage. You take one step from employee toward architect. That path is uncomfortable. It's uncertain. It requires action. But it's the only path that leads anywhere different than where you are. The Medici took path 2, with less information, less technology, less safety, more risk. And they built a dynasty that lasted 3 centuries. You have every advantage they didn't. The only question is, which path will you take? The Medici started with nothing. You're starting with everything they never had. Technology, information, safety, global markets, instant communication, legal protection, financial infrastructure, every advantage. The only thing you don't have that they did have is the mindset. They were born into a world that forced architect thinking. You were born into a world that trains employee thinking. But thinking can be changed. The 7 shifts prove it. From hours to systems, from ownership to access, from expenses to investments, from saving to deploying, from avoiding risk to structuring risk, from consuming status to building leverage, from employee to architect. These aren't genetic, they're learned. The Medici learned them, you can learn them. The difference between where you are and where you want to be is not talent, not luck, not timing. It's thinking. Change the thinking. The rest changes with it. Final question. Who do you want to be in 5 years? Not what do you want to have. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who trades hours for someone else's number? Or someone who built systems that run without you? Do you want to be someone who owns things that depreciate? Or someone who has access to everything that multiplies? Do you want to be someone who saves their way to mediocrity? Or someone who deploys their way to capability? Do you want to be someone who saves their way to capability? Do you want to be someone who saves their way to mediocrity? Or someone who structures risk and builds something significant? The Medici chose architect. The world remembers their choice 3 centuries later. You're choosing right now. The video is ending. The choice is beginning. Choose architect. Build systems. Deploy capital. Structure risk. Become necessary. That's how wealth gets built. That's how the Medici did it. That's how you do it too. Most people will watch this and move on. A few will stay and change. Decide which one you are. This channel doesn't do fluff. It doesn't do noise. It doesn't do motivation without foundation. It documents how wealth actually gets built. Using the Medici as the case study because their methods are verified, their results are documented, their thinking is preserved. If you want more of this, more documented strategies, more historical proof, more systematic thinking, subscribe. Not because you need motivation, because you need the blueprint. The Medici left one. This channel decodes it. No fluff, no noise, just strategy. Subscribe if you're not one of the ones who stays average. The shifts are documented. The path is clear. The choice is yours. Make it count.